Red Hollow, Texas, had always been quiet. The kind of town where everyone knew your name, where Friday night lights still meant something, where farms had been passed down for 3 generations. It was a town frozen in a simpler time, a place of community and tradition. Sheriff Daniel Hayes stood inside his small, cluttered office, the weight of the town resting on his shoulders. On his desk lay a single sheet of paper, a contract. A simple document with the power to shatter the peace of Red Hollow forever. If he signed it, the town's farmland, its very soul, would be handed over to Titan Ridge Energy, a massive oil corporation promising a golden age of economic growth. If he didn't sign it, he would become the problem. He would become the enemy of progress. Deputy Marcus, young and pragmatic, leaned against the doorframe, his expression a mixture of duty and concern. "Sir, the state already approved the project. Your signature is just the last step, a formality." Daniel didn't answer right away. He looked out the window, past the dusty street, to Old Man Carter sweeping the porch of his family's grocery store. That store wasn't just a building. It was a legacy built by Carter's grandfather back in 1948. It was history. "This isn't just land, Marcus," Daniel said, his voice low but firm. "It's their lives. It's everything they are." That evening, the air in the town hall was thick with a tense mix of desperation and hope. Titan Ridge had organized a town meeting, and the turnout was huge. Victor Kane, the company's regional director, stepped onto the stage. He was polished, confident, his smile as slick as the oil he promised to drill. "We're bringing jobs," he announced, his voice booming through the speakers. "We're bringing new infrastructure, more funding for your schools. Red Hollow deserves to step into the future. It deserves progress." Murmurs rippled through the room. He was a master salesman, preying on their fears. People were struggling. The farms hadn't been profitable in years. The promise of steady paychecks, of a better life for their kids, was a powerful lure. It was a tempting deal, a lifeline in a sea of debt. Then, from the back of the room, Sheriff Daniel Hayes stood up. A hush fell over the crowd. All eyes turned to him. "You're offering temporary jobs," he said, his voice calm and steady, cutting through the corporate promises. "But what happens when the water gets contaminated? When the soil cracks under the strain? What happens when our wells, the lifeblood of this community, run dry?" The room fell completely silent. You could hear a pin drop. Victor Kane's polished smile thinned, a flicker of irritation in his eyes. "Sheriff Hayes," he said, his tone dripping with condescension, "are you suggesting we're irresponsible? That we don't care about the environment?" Daniel held his gaze. "I'm suggesting you don't live here. You won't be here to see the consequences." After the meeting, as the crowd dispersed into the cool night air, Kane cornered Daniel outside. The friendly facade was gone, replaced by a cold, menacing stare. "This deal is happening, Sheriff," Kane said softly, his voice a low threat. "It's going to happen with or without you. Don't stand in the way of progress." Daniel simply handed the unsigned contract back to him. "Then do it without me." Kane snatched the paper, his jaw tight with fury. The battle lines had been drawn. The next morning, the war began. Posters had appeared all over town overnight, plastered on telephone poles and shop windows. Sheriff Hayes is blocking your future. The friendly morning show on the local radio station was suddenly questioning his motives, painting him as a stubborn old-timer holding the town hostage. Social media, a tool Daniel barely understood, was on fire with posts accusing him of corruption, of having a personal vendetta against Titan Ridge. The corporation was a well-oiled machine, and its propaganda was brutally effective. It was turning his own people, the people he had sworn to protect, against him. That night, the tension followed him home. His wife, Emily, sat across from him at the kitchen table, her face etched with worry. "Dan, people are turning against you. The phone hasn't stopped ringing. The things they're saying." He just nodded, staring into his cold coffee. "I know." She hesitated, then asked the question that hung in the air between them. "What if you're wrong? What if they're right? Maybe this is what the town needs." He didn't answer. His gaze drifted to a child's drawing hanging on the fridge, held up by a magnet. It was a picture his son, Liam, had drawn in school, a colorful, crayon stick figure of his dad in uniform, a big star on his chest. "A hero. If I sign that paper," Daniel said quietly, his voice thick with emotion, "I won't be able to look him in the eyes again. I won't be that man anymore." The following morning felt different. Colder. When Daniel walked into his office, he froze in the doorway. Something was wrong. His silver badge, the symbol of his authority and his life's work, was sitting on the center of his desk. It wasn't where he'd left it. Beneath it, a single piece of paper. A suspension order. The official reason was obstruction of economic development. The mayor had caved. The pressure had been too much. Titan Ridge had won the political battle. As Daniel slowly picked up the heavy badge, his phone buzzed. "Unknown number," he answered. A cold, synthetic voice spoke on the other end, devoid of any emotion. "Last chance, Sheriff. Sign the paper, or this gets personal." The line went dead. A chill ran down Daniel's spine. This was no longer just about contracts and politics. This was a direct threat. He slipped the badge into his pocket, its familiar weight now a heavy burden. He walked out of his office and stepped out onto the main street of Red Hollow. He was no longer Sheriff Hayes. He was just Daniel Hayes, a man who had lost everything. But as he stood there, watching the town he loved being torn apart, he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to run. He didn't know it yet, but the next 48 hours would change Red Hollow forever. The fight was just beginning. Thanks for watching. Be sure to subscribe for part 2. Daniel walked straight into Carter's grocery, the little bell above the door jingling his arrival. "Mr. Carter?" A man whose face was a roadmap of a long life in Red Hollow looked up from behind the counter. His eyes were wide with a mix of fear and desperation. "Daniel," he started, his voice barely a whisper, "is it true? Are you really stopping the deal?" Daniel didn't hesitate. He'd replayed this moment in his mind 100 times. "Yes, I am," he said, his voice firm but not unkind. "Because this whole Titan Ridge project, it won't end the way they're promising. It's a bad deal for us, for everyone." Before Carter could even begin to process the news, a deafening boom ripped through the air, echoing from the north side of town. It was a sound that didn't belong in their quiet valley. Both men rushed outside. Plumes of thick, black smoke were already climbing into the afternoon sky, staining the blue canvas. It was coming from Carter's property. His big storage barn, the one filled with this year's feed and expensive equipment, was engulfed in flames. Within minutes, the wail of sirens filled the air as fire trucks raced to the scene. Volunteers from all over the community dropped what they were doing and rushed to help, a testament to the town's spirit. But it was too late. The fire was too hot, too fast. They could only watch as the old wooden structure groaned and collapsed into a pile of charred timber and ash. Thankfully, no one was hurt. But it wasn't an accident. Everyone knew it. It was a message, loud and clear, sent to anyone who dared to stand in Titan Ridge's way. That night, an unnerving stillness settled over Daniel's house. A black SUV, its windows tinted so dark you couldn't see inside, idled at the curb for nearly an hour. It just sat there, a silent, menacing predator in the quiet residential street. No one got out, no one knocked on the door, no one even called. In a way, that silence was more terrifying than any shouted threat. It was a promise of what was to come, a weight pressing down on the darkness. The next morning, the attack became public. The local news channel, usually filled with reports of county fairs and lost pets, led with an explosive story. The headline flashed across the screen in bold letters. Sheriff Hayes received secret payments from rival energy investors. Fake bank statements, forged documents, all designed to look real, flickered on the screen. It was a character assassination, broadcast for the entire county to see. Deputy Marcus, loyal to a fault, slammed his fist on Daniel's kitchen counter, making the coffee mugs jump. This is a smear campaign, Daniel. A complete lie. Daniel nodded slowly, his jaw tight. He'd expected something like this, but the speed and viciousness of it still stung. They're isolating me, he said, his voice low. If the town turns against me, I have no power. And just like that, it was done. The county commissioners, pressured by the brewing scandal and influenced by Titan Ridge's deep pockets, called an emergency meeting. They appointed a temporary sheriff, a man named Peterson, who was openly, and very vocally, supportive of the energy project. In the blink of an eye, Daniel Hayes was no longer Sheriff Hayes. He had no badge, no authority, no official power to protect his town, but they couldn't take away his instincts. And his instincts were screaming that the barn fire wasn't a random act of vandalism. It was the first move in a much bigger, more dangerous game. Over the next 2 nights, the campaign of fear escalated. More accidents plagued the valley. A farmer woke up to find his brand new combine harvester sabotaged, its engine destroyed. Another discovered his fence lines cut, allowing his cattle to wander onto the highway. Anonymous threats, typed on plain white paper, began appearing in mailboxes, warning people to stay silent and support the project. It was psychological warfare, designed to break the community's spirit. While the new sheriff wrote everything off as unfortunate coincidences, Daniel started his own quiet investigation. He worked out of his garage, transforming it into a makeshift command center. He began gathering evidence, piece by painstaking piece. He pulled security footage from gas stations and storefronts along the main roads. He started tracking the movement of vehicles, noticing a pattern of private security trucks belonging to Titan Ridge in the vicinity of every incident. He spoke to witnesses, people who were too scared to talk to the new sheriff but still trusted him. One night, Emily found him standing in the garage, the wall covered in a chaotic web of photos, maps, and handwritten notes. It looked like something out of a crime movie. "Daniel," she whispered from the doorway, her voice filled with worry. "You're not the sheriff anymore. What are you doing? You're putting us all in danger." He turned to face her, his eyes weary but resolute. He walked over and took her hands in his. "Emily, this is why I have to do this. I'm not just solving a crime. I'm protecting what's ours. Our home, our neighbors, our future." The next morning, the threat became deeply personal. On their front porch, propped against the door, was a plain manila envelope. Daniel's heart pounded as he picked it up. Inside, there was no letter, no demand for money, just a single photograph. It was a picture of their son, Liam, playing on the swings in the schoolyard. A picture taken from a distance, without their knowledge. He flipped it over. 3 words were scrawled on the back in stark block letters: "Sign," or else. That was it. The breaking point. Emily saw the photo and crumbled, her sobs echoing the fear that had been building inside her for weeks. "They're targeting our son, Daniel. They're coming after our little boy." Daniel's hands trembled with a rage so pure it felt like ice in his veins. But when he spoke, his voice was steady, devoid of any fear. "This ends now." There was no more time for quiet investigations. No more pinning notes to a wall. He gathered all the evidence he had collected: the surveillance logs, the witness statements, the photos of the security trucks, the threatening notes, and packed it neatly into a folder. He wasn't going to the local authorities. He wasn't going to the compromised county seat. He was driving to the state capitol. If Red Hollow wouldn't listen, if his own town had been silenced by fear and corruption, then maybe someone higher up would. He kissed Emily and Liam goodbye, a promise hanging in the air that he would fix this. He got into his truck and pulled onto the highway, the folder of evidence lying on the passenger seat like a loaded gun. The fate of his town was riding with him. About 20 miles outside Red Hollow, where the familiar rolling hills give way to the open highway, he noticed it. A semi-truck in his rearview mirror. It was gaining on him, fast. Too fast. It was closing the distance with an unnatural speed, its massive grille filling the entire mirror. Daniel's instincts screamed. This wasn't a reckless driver. This was an attack. He barely had time to react, to even brace himself. The semi swerved violently, its tires screeching. It slammed into the driver's side of his pickup truck with the force of an explosion. Metal twisted and screamed in protest. The driver's side window shattered, showering him with a storm of glass. The world spun into a dizzying, sickening blur of green and blue and gray, and then, as his truck tumbled off the road, everything was swallowed by a sudden, complete darkness. Thanks for watching. And if you're enjoying this story, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss what happens next. Daniel's eyes fluttered open to the steady, rhythmic beep of a heart monitor. The sterile glow of hospital lights pressed down on him. He felt a gentle squeeze on his hand and turned his head. Emily was there, her face a mess of relief and tears. "You're alive," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. He tried to speak, but his throat was a desert. Near the window, a silhouette shifted. It was Marcus, his expression grim. "It wasn't just an accident, Daniel," he said, his voice low and serious. Daniel swallowed, a painful, raw feeling. "I know." The quiet of the room was suddenly broken by the tinny sound of a television. Marcus had turned it on. A bold, flashing graphic filled the screen. Breaking news. The headline was stark. "Leaked emails expose Titan Ridge pressure tactics." The camera zoomed in on a document. Internal corporate emails that had somehow found their way online. Phrases were highlighted in an angry red. "Apply pressure. Make examples. Force compliance." The air in the hospital room grew heavy, silent. Finally, Daniel found his voice, a raspy question. Who? Who leaked them?" A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched Marcus's lips. "Let's just say, not everyone inside Titan Ridge agrees with their methods. That leak was the crack in the dam." Within hours, everything changed. State investigators announced they were reopening Daniel's case. The carefully constructed smear campaign against him began to crumble under its own weight. The temporary sheriff, the one who'd been so eager to see him gone, quietly resigned. By evening, a low murmur from outside the hospital had grown into a steady hum. Hundreds of people from Red Hollow had gathered on the lawn below. You could see them from the window, farmers in their work boots, teachers clutching signs, mechanics wiping grease from their hands. And right at the front, old Mr. Carter, his face set with determination, holding a handmade sign that simply said, "We stand with Hayes." Seeing them, something shifted in Daniel. He insisted, against the nurses' protests, on being wheeled outside. The moment the crowd saw him, a wave of applause erupted, a sound so powerful it seemed to shake the very ground. He looked out at the faces. These were the same people who, just days before, had looked at him with doubt and suspicion. He cleared his throat, and the crowd fell silent, waiting. "I never fought Titan Ridge," he said, his voice hoarse but clear. "I fought for you." The words hung in the air, a simple truth that everyone understood. A week later, the news they had all been hoping for came. State officials officially suspended Titan Ridge's permit, pending a full, top-to-bottom investigation. Victor Kane, the slick corporate face of the operation, was seen leaving Texas without a word. The contract was never signed. The months that followed were a blur of recovery and rebuilding. Daniel eventually got his badge back, pinning it to his chest with a renewed sense of purpose. But it wasn't just him who had changed. Red Hollow had changed too. People started talking to each other more, really listening. They paid more attention to what was happening in their town council meetings. They stood together, a community forged in the fire of shared adversity. One warm evening, Daniel was sitting on his porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Liam came and sat beside him, the way he used to. "Dad?" his son asked, his voice small but serious. "Were you scared?" Daniel turned to look at him, a genuine smile spreading across his face. "Every single second," he admitted. Liam looked confused. "Then why didn't you just quit?" He thought about the fear, the pain, the doubt. "Because," he said slowly, "courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about deciding something else matters more." Red Hollow stayed a small town. It stayed imperfect, with its own set of problems and quirks, but it stayed theirs. Then why didn't you just quit? Daniel's gaze drifted back out to the farmland, glowing in the last light of day.